Hello everyone, I'm Hayley and I release videos that demonstrate all the different techniques you can use to transform your photos into art. In this week's video, I'll show you how I used photography and Photoshop to create my image if you go down to the woods today. If you go down to the woods today, it started out as a very different concept. On this particular day, I had wanted to go into a forest and take a picture of basically a nature sprite, but this particular forest, it doesn't have a great reputation. It's where they find bodies and drug deals are done. So with that in mind at the time, I think that, the fear of that got into my psyche, and it actually ended up becoming a story about a girl that's kind of running in fear. I don't know if that's what other people see when they look at it, but that is what I was thinking when it was created. So generally, as a woman shooting on location, puts you in a fairly vulnerable spot at the best of times. But as I record this, that whole thing about a woman choosing a man versus a bear in the forest is raging around social media. And this really is along those same lines. When you're out in public by yourself as a woman, there's always this threat of menace from either man or beast when shooting alone. And so my mother this day had insisted on accompanying me, so I wasn't alone there. But regardless, the image sort of became about a girl running from an unseen threat and is a commentary about feeling vulnerable. The quote I used to accompany this image is, "Oh, but you must travel through those woods again and again," said a shadow at the window, "and you must be lucky to avoid the wolf every time. But the wolf only needs enough luck to find you once." And that's from a book called Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. So basically my whole purpose in creating this image was to build a dress from a piece of fabric. So this dress is not a dress, it was actually just a $20 piece of fabric. I'll show you actually some behind the scenes images. So this is really what I was wearing at the time. I wore a similar colored top and some shorts. I pulled that off my shoulders so you could see my back. Then for primarily most of the shoot, I just kept the $20 piece of fabric wrapped around my body. And then over and over again, I threw pieces of that fabric around, which I then blended together in Photoshop to create the dress. Now, the problem on this particular day is that I had got to this forest too early. I wanted to get there around dusk, so the sun would be a little bit down and there weren't harsh shadows around, but I actually got there too early. And so because I had to shoot all the components in the same light, from the same perspective, at the same time, pretty much essentially, so they would easily blend together in Photoshop, it became a bit of a problem because I'd shoot maybe my pose and then I'd start throwing the fabric around, but I noticed the sun would have moved and suddenly I was lit by the sun. You can see here, there is some sun on my face, whereas there wasn't in that one. And so this sun kept moving. So I would shoot a bit, it would move, and then I'd have to move back and shoot again. And this happened maybe 3 times. So it was a real pain, to be honest. And not only that, there was this threat going on, and I was getting bitten by mosquitoes the whole time. And I kept dropping my dress and falling over it. And the whole thing was pretty much just a disaster. So the fact that it actually became a fairly successful image is still kind of surprising to me, to be honest. It's amazing what you can do with Photoshop. Photoshop truly is magical and can save just about anything. So let's take a look at how this image was created. So this here is the final image. Now it pretty much looks nothing like those before images. So this is the main pose image, pretty much. Very different. So one thing you might notice is that this is just a tiny sliver and yet there is a full forest around me. So the first thing I did, and I do this for pretty much most of my images, is I basically created a panorama where I took the picture of the main scene and then turned my camera to the right and then the left to be able to extend the scene. Now, this is not only handy for creating more of a location around a person, but it's also fantastic for printing because it gives your images more resolution. So now let's work through. There's a lot of layers to this one because building that dress was quite time consuming. So here is that panorama. Let me see if I can show you the different components of it. Oh gosh, there's quite a lot. So that was image 1, which I brightened up. Image 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it was more than just 3 images as you'd expect from turning right to left. It was actually more like 8. That might have been a little bit of a variation on one. Then I've just darkened all that down, started adding in my first piece of fabric. So there's the main dress that I posed around. This was one of the pieces of fabric. Now this little file is all over the place, so I apologize for that. Basically, next I started building her hair. So that really doesn't make any sense, but I'm sure it will later on. Then I lightened the background because I knew that that's where I wanted the eye to go. So basically I just painted like a pale yellow across the image and brought down the opacity. There is her head. Now, you'll see some of that hair that I put in behind, so that's why that was there. So that's her main pose, so the hand and the face. Here I just did some skin correction and also added in more hair by the looks, and then darkened that down to suit the background. Here I threw in an extra piece of hair. So here is all the different hair flicks I took. I took many, and so I just had to choose which bits kind of worked the best. Cutting out hair is difficult, and it was particularly difficult in this circumstance, but that's pretty much how it was done. And this image is really quite funny, but you can see I threw my head around a lot. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to look as if she was moving, and if she was moving, her hair would be flying around. Then I've put in, I think that's her back arm, and started blending in the fabric. So basically I just cut it out and then kind of moved it into position, which took a little bit of experimentation to get a nice composition. You'll see that bit was lit by the sun a bit more, so we'll darken it down. More. That bit was really lit by the sun. So you can see what a problem that became as the sun moved and why I had to keep moving back and shooting over and over again. So this is just really a lot of masking and color changing so the dress looked like it belonged together, and just choosing the bits that made a really nice shape. Now I was roughly going for a rose shape. There are a lot of these pieces, but it does eventually look quite nice, I think. So people might assume that I was wearing one dress, but it is many different fabric pieces. So then I started doing some healing to it, changed the color of it to make it a lot warmer. Here I've done a bunch of color toning, so bright in the middle, made it more red. I won't go through every layer, but you'll see as we go what it's doing. This one here, I just darkened down the background and kept her quite bright even more. I think this is where I started to throw on some textures, so you'll see it became quite texturally there. Really darkening that background down so that the eye goes to her. Now this was an interesting little addition. So this image here, which is lightening again that background, is actually a picture of some clouds that were taken from a plane. So you would never guess, but it's just put on a low opacity and on an overlay blend mode. And that just really kind of directs the eye to that area and sort of makes it look like the sun was splashing across there. Then I sharpened the image, really adding in some more kind of red and warmth to bring out that dress. Then again, I have added even more warmth. I have taken the warmth out of her skin because she was starting to look too red. And now this is an interesting little thing to talk about. See under her arm here, the forest looks lighter than the rest of it. I missed that when I first edited this image, and there are actually prints out there with that. And then one day I noticed it and thought, oh my God, that is a pretty huge error. So I then later came back and fixed that up. So that is the final image. If you go down to the woods today, it has been a pretty popular print actually. I've had requests for it to be printed very large as well. And I do wonder what people think when they look at this, because to me it is an indication of fear. She is running from someone in fear. So I sort of wonder why that is a popular image for people. But it also is, I think, the dress is quite beautiful. Running through a forest is quite evocative. So yeah, maybe that's why. I don't know. But I am pretty proud of how this dress came together. And it is a really complicated but also somewhat fun technique to combine a dress that way out of a piece of fabric. And it saves you a fair bit of money. Creating a dress like this and blending hair together is something I go much more deeply into in Exposing Illusions. So inside that course, I'll show you exactly how this was done and also what to think about as you're creating it so it blends together nicely and has a nice shape. Also give you advice on what to do and what not to do so it blends properly. And the same goes for hair. Now this file ended up being about 18 gig when I created, which practically broke my computer. But that's because I was working with so many pieces, like just testing what would work, and not all of those things ended up in the final image. So this is how you create a dress with Photoshop that's perfect for a mosquito-bitten princess. If you'd love to see more examples of how my artworks are created, be sure to subscribe so we can hang out again. But maybe not in the woods.